Hi, I'm David Busch and welcome back to Busch History. I'm doing a series of videos on the various presidents and administrations, starting with George Washington. Each of these videos is going to be relatively short and will be concentrated on the events of the president and their administration. So we're not going to be doing a lot of things about before the president or after the president. And all of these are going to be accessible on YouTube, one through whoever we're up to by the time I get done with this, and on my website as well, which is www.buschistory.net. And I'll show you that real quick. So this is my website. Those of you that have looked at my videos before have already been here, but this website is, fairly concise. I'll step out of the way so you can take a look at it in what you can access with it. If you scroll down, you will see white boxes. And in these white boxes are all topics from American history, starting with the colonial era and going through the present day. Underneath each topic is a direct YouTube link, a brief summary, and then on to the next topic, a YouTube link, a brief summary, and also on this page you will find folders with all of the accompanying information that's used in those YouTube links. Let's get started with number one. President George Washington, first president of the United States. Very, very popular as a result of leading the Continental Army over the British. And he would end up being probably the most popular man in the country. Let's take a look at it. President Washington, number one, his vice president was John Adams. His political party, he didn't claim to have a political party. He thought they were a bad idea, but he certainly was a Federalist-leaning gentleman. He did support the Constitution, and supporters of the Constitution were Federalists. His term of office, 1789 to 1797. Interesting fact, presidents always serve in odd years, and they're elected in even years. So an election is held, say, in 2008, the president did not begin his term until 2009. Who came before him and after him, and what were their political parties? Well, no one was before him because he's the first. And John Adams followed, and he was a Federalist. He declared his political party. Were there any unusual circumstances surrounding his ascent to the presidency? If so, describe the situation in specific detail. Well, nothing unusual because he was first, but he was so popular that he received all 69 electoral votes for the presidency. So that's pretty good. The office. Are there any catchphrases or terms specifically associated with this president? Mr. President and the father of our country. There was a lot of debate about what George Washington should be called, and he suggested the president because the president presides, which is the whole idea of the term. When he left office, what was the reason? Was it choice? Was it natural death? Was it assassination? Well, he decided after 2 terms he had had enough. So in 1796 he decides he's not going to run for the presidency again, thereby establishing the precedent of 2 terms. It doesn't become law until the 1950s, but at this time, President Washington says, 2 terms is enough, it's time for a changing of the guard. Domestic issues and events. Well, during the Revolution, he is his war counsel for advice, thereby they became the first cabinet of the United States. The Constitution says the president is allowed to have advisors. Well, they became his cabinet. When president, Congress allowed him to make appointments for advisors without challenging him. So he was able to choose anybody he wanted to be in his cabinet. And his cabinet was a cabinet of all-stars. Take a look. Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson. Secretary of Treasury, Alexander Hamilton. Secretary of War, Henry Knox. And Attorney General, Sir Edmund Randolph. Boy, we could use those guys now. Significant accomplishments during his first term. The Judiciary Act of 1789 established the framework for the federal court system. Article 3 of the Constitution says there will be a judicial branch, but it's very open as to exactly how that judicial branch will be set up, and that occurs with the Judiciary Act of 1789. In 1790, the capitals moved from New York to the Potomac, and that's part of the deal with the anti-federalists in the South to support the Constitution, that we would move the capital to a more central location between the North and the South. 1791, the Bill of Rights is actually ratified, which is an incredible deal. It meant that the anti-federalists trusted the Federalists, and the Federalists kept their word. A major test of the new government was the Whiskey Rebellion in 1794, when the moonshiners the guys with Moonshine Whiskey and Mingo Creek turned around and did not want to pay a tax that Alexander Hamilton had suggested be imposed on them as an excise tax. It was the beginning of the philosophy of let's tax the poor people, and they didn't want to pay that tax. Not too different from Shays' Rebellion, except this time around, Washington is going to defeat these guys that aren't paying the taxes. And he marches with Alexander Hamilton at his side, and Washington puts on his Revolutionary War uniform, by the way, very inappropriate, because you cannot be in the military and be president of the United States. But it was all about presence. It was all about impression. And as they marched towards the Moonshiners dispersed. And that was basically the end of it. But it showed the power of the federal government. Another important thing was the Treaty of Grenville in 1795, and this had to do with the Northwest Territory. Indians in Northwest Territory, following defeat by General Anthony Wayne at the Battle of Fallen Timbers, they ceded land in the Northwest Territory. And that's going to be important because it connects back to the Land Ordinance and the Northwest Ordinance in the Ohio Valley. And finally, in 1796, George Washington issues his farewell address. Remember, he said he's not going to run again. And he said two very important things in that farewell address. One of them was he warned against the dangers of political parties and their divisiveness. He did not believe in political parties. And the other thing he warned against was entangling alliances. And he meant political alliances with nations around the world. He didn't have a problem with trade, but he thought if you choose one country as your friend, you have chosen all of their enemies as your enemy. And he did not think that was healthy for the United States. So Washington's foreign policy events, we have the French Revolution in 1789, and the debate is, who do we support? Do we support the revolutionaries, or do we support King Louis? Remember, King Louis supported the United States in the American Revolution. If we support him, we're supporting the monarchists against the people who want democracy. If we support the people who want the revolution, we're supporting the people who want to overthrow the king who supported us. It's a tough position to be in. And around the same time, we get something called the Guinea Affair, the Citizen Guinea Affair. Edmund Guinea was a French ambassador. And he came over to the United States, and he realized there was a division in the United States. George Washington and John Adams supported the British. However, Thomas Jefferson, the Secretary of State, supported the French. So he was seeking, Edmund Guinea was seeking a stronger alliance between the United States and France. He wanted the United States to support France in their wars against Great Britain and against Spain. This was a losing proposition, and it did not occur, but it nevertheless created turbulence in the early government. We have 1793, the Neutrality Proclamation, where Washington basically said that we are not going to get involved in affairs of other nations, and we're going to not have entangling alliances. He thought it was a bad idea. In 1795, we have the Jay and Pinckney's treaties, and the Jay Treaty and Pinckney Treaty, very interesting. We had become close friends with Britain after the Revolution, and you would think that we'd be closer friends with France. So what happens is in 1795, we have basically a treaty with Britain called the John Jay Treaty, the Jay Treaty. And the Jay Treaty gave Britain most favored nation status. That meant we would trade with them above all other partners in the world, above all other nations in the world for trading purposes. Well, that angered the French. So now how do you get the French a little resolved here and a little feeling better about things? You offer them something. So Charles Pinckney came up with a solution. He said, why don't we take the port of New Orleans, which connects to the Mississippi River, goes up into the Ohio Valley, and why don't we find a way to internationalize that? So we struck a deal with Spain to internationalize the port of New Orleans, thereby allowing the French access to the port of New Orleans and the Mississippi River, thereby allowing them access to the Ohio Valley, their old stomping grounds and their old trading partners. And that worked well. And then finally in 1796, we have Washington's farewell address. And Washington's farewell address had to do with the fact that he's two warnings. He warned against political parties. He thought they were bad because they were divisive. And he warned against entangling political alliances. He said, if you become allied with one nation, you become enemies with their enemies. And that's not a good idea. So Washington leaves in 1797, and next we will pick up with John Adams. So for Busch History, I'm David Busch, and we'll see you next time.